Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
This week on Red, White, and Blue, a distinguished panel talking with us about political predictions for 2012, probably our favorite subject, David. Joining us tonight are first Professor Richard Murray, Director for the Survey Research Institute, the Political Science Department here at the University of Houston. Next, Professor Franklin Jones, who's Chair of the Political Science Department at Texas Southern University. And next, Professor Robert Stein with new glasses from the Political Science Department at Rice University. And finally, I guess he's a doctor too, a doctor of laws, Robert Miller, partner with Locke Lord. Welcome, gentlemen.
He's also known as Blogger Miller.
That's correct.
And Blogger Miller, you've famously reported that in prior Republican runoffs, statewide runoffs, I believe, anybody who is in the 40s usually wins, and I think you even, it was your conclusion that you figured that David Dewhurst, since he was in that position, will prevail on July is it the 31st?
It is the 31st, runoff, unprecedented in Texas. We've never had it before. But I do think Dewhurst is in a good position. If you look at the first round, 67% of the vote either went to Dewhurst or Leppert. Those Leppert voters, question is, do they come back? But if they come back, they will vote for Dewhurst.
And who has got the Cruz position here on the panel? Anyone? He's Mr. Excitement. You know, at the Republican convention, Dewhurst got booed. I mean, you know, surely there's a case for Ted.
Well, I looked at Robert's blog, and in fact, I did something for the Baker Institute and looked at the vote margin. It was 144,000 votes. We can talk percentages, but Leppert probably had something like 181,000 votes. So let's assume history matters, and Robert had actually looked at all the races, state legislative races, looked at a number, I think it was around 44% in the general, but not only I think does that hold up, but do the math. About 75% of primary voters will show up on a runoff. If that's true, you'd have to have Cruz's supporters come back at a rate of 94%, Dewhurst supporters come back at the average, and still Dewhurst wins. If you bring in the Leppert vote, and assume that half of those voters come back, 60%, we have polling data that shows that Leppert supporters out of Dallas, about 2-1, supported Dewhurst as her second choice. So no new voters seem to be coming back. It's illegal for a Democratic primary voter to vote in a runoff for Republicans. So although I got, and I'm sure Robert got a good deal of criticism, I just don't see where the numbers add up to a victory for Cruz, short of a colossal mistake on the part of Dewhurst.
Dr. Jones, I was going to ask you, and this is in line with this conversation, 12% approximately of the registered voters of Texas voted in the primary. So the question being asked, where would all these voters come from? I guess the truth is 88% of the voters could show up July 31st and vote in the Dewhurst-Cruz race if they wanted to, couldn't they?
Right, but this does not seem to be, you know, a very popular election, and I say that because we don't see very much campaigning going at the same time. But I also think that the most significant thing about the Cruz candidacy is whether or not he can develop a foundation for the sort of Tea Party types in Texas who really want to challenge the Republican establishment. I don't see him as being a major opponent to Dewhurst, but the question is whether or not he can develop something that the Tea Party types could use for further development.
Well, Richard Murray, what did you see in the turnout locally, Republicans and Democrats, that might be instructive about what's going to happen in November in terms of the enthusiasm of the partisans?
Well, with no meaningful presidential race on the Republican side after Romney had locked it up, and no race to begin with on the Democratic side, we had lousy turnout, which is pretty common here in Harris County. Interesting that, particularly on Election Day voting, how well Cruz ran in this really low turnout back in early June. That was a warning sign, I think, that Dewhurst was fading a bit here at the end. I think Dewhurst probably wins, but the fact that Perry has come in 100% suggests to me that Mike Basiles, who polled for both Dewhurst and Perry, is saying this is far from being a lock. That for the governor to put his prestige on the line, and basically his campaign team now is going over and working for Dewhurst, suggests that this is going to be a pretty hard fight on the Republican side. In a very low turnout runoff in the end of July, Cruz has a shot. Yeah, it's a minority shot, but it's a real shot of winning. I think 35 or 40% chance. So it wouldn't be a shocking upset at this point for Dewhurst to be beaten.
Interesting. I was going to ask you, and we were talking off the air, the numbers of ballot by mail or early voters. I mean, isn't it true that given the numbers we're going to have, and probably the vast majority of voters cast well before Election Day? So the campaigns are kind of not spending the money now. They're going to spend it later. They may be chasing a minority number of votes.
Between the mail ballots and I think the July 31st date is important there. I'm, for the first time in my 45 years in Harris County, going to vote by mail. Not going to be here on July 31st. And we have the longest run-up to the runoff. So people have a lot more time to get a mail ballot, get it in. That plus early voting, we're probably looking at 75% of the vote cast before July 31st.
Wow.
So, yeah, the election's underway right now. It's a practical matter.
One of the problems with that is that probably, and I hear Robert saying this, is it probably disadvantages Cruz. Cruz needs a campaign. He needs debates. He needs a hopeful mistake on the part of Dewhurst. And if people are already voting, well, they won't, not today, but well into 2 weeks before, and their mail ballots, they may miss a lot. You know, it sort of raises the question, what's an election anymore if everybody's voting before Election Day? So I think, as Dick said, I think that 70% is high, and I think Republicans particularly like voting by mail and early because they're over 65 and meet it, or they're more likely to travel like Dick.
When you elongate the voting period, the candidate with the greatest resources has the best shot.
Yeah.
So that clearly still is Dewhurst.
Absolutely.
The Republicans in Harris County ran off an incumbent district attorney. How did that happen, in your view? I mean, you're a political scientist. You could. I would say it's a grand jury coup d'etat that got her and knocked her out.
Pat Lycos.
Yeah.
Yeah. She has always been a divisive personality. She had run against for the district attorney office before, went through a tough race to win the position, was controversial in office. Some prominent attorneys like Rusty Hardin opposed her continuance. And she got hammered by the grand jury, by a terrifically effective commercial, and she had no television advertising, and her opponent did and ran a very good ad taking local news anchors and taking little slices out saying, Pat Lycos is in trouble, and there was no answer. And that ad I thought was particularly effective. An unanswered ad can really do you some damage in a political race.
And the Democrats have nominated an esteemed lawyer with 2 prior criminal accusations, which means he's got 2 mugshots.
Yeah, but
I would guess
he convicted?
No, he
Well,
wasn't.
let's be fair, David.
Yeah, I'm happy for him that he's still able to practice. He still will be the top of the ticket. He runs as a county officer ahead of the state district judges. We have 23 Democratic district judges. Somebody tell me just how they overcome a Republican opposition to a fellow with that type of track record.
I think part of the problem is inside the Democratic Party itself. I mean, I don't believe ever thought that they would be challenging Pat Lycos in a serious manner, and there was no real effort put into finding a, quote, credible candidate to run for that office. And so we've seen this pattern in the Democratic Party, both statewide and in Harris County, where they've not seen themselves necessarily as competitive, and so they've not gone out and tried to get the kinds of people who would be competitive. And so the fact that they would have this fellow running is just simply their own undoing.
Well, why are the Democrats having, this is for anybody, after 4 years ago, Democrats had a good year in Harris County. They won the vast majority of the contested races. So now we're 4 years later, and the Democrats can't get their act together enough to recruit a qualified candidate to run for DA? I don't understand it. Anyone have an explanation?
I'd be careful to say the Democrats had a good year. It might have been that the Republicans had a bad year, and I mean that not to be facetious, but if you recall the district attorney and all of his Republican problems he had, Pat Lycos, I think, replicated that. Whether you'll see more of these candidate-based mistakes. But 2 things happened in 2010, I think it's worth noting. We all thought that traditionally straight ticket voting would stay at its 40, 48, 40, 50%. I remember winning a very lucrative bet and buying a new bicycle on it when I said it would go over 60. And
Who got the bicycle?
I did. And it went over 68%. I think what you got is a level of polarization that's national, but here, because we allow straight ticket voting, what you see is when there's a reasonably good top of the ticket, Obama had a very good get out the vote, heavy early voting, which is where he won that election in Harris County, you'll see everybody falling in line. But of course, it doesn't necessarily depend on the candidates unless they do something horrifically bad. And I think Rosenthal did something horrifically bad, and Pat Lycos probably didn't do anything right. I mean, with so many mistakes, as Dick pointed out, The truth of the matter is, also one other last thing, redistricting mattered. The Democratic Party had essentially an African American characterization put on them. That is, the redistricting efforts from 2000 and now in 2010 have pretty much made you, if you're a Democrat, you're either African American or Hispanic. Tell me how many white Anglo males in the state legislature. With Scott Hochberg retiring, I can count one out of Boston. It's really hard to start recruiting candidates from a base where the Anglo vote's still about 50% if every time you're looking at a Voting Rights Act and you're putting Sheila Jackson Lee and Garnet Coleman first, where the same problem for the Republicans is recruiting Hispanics, and they have not been successful at that. But I'm not certain the Democratic Party is hurt by anything but good old-fashioned redistricting.
So does that mean what you're saying is for looking at the fall election, I think you're probably projecting straight ticket voting could be north of 70% in Harris County and maybe in the state.
Yeah.
So given that, does it even matter who the Democrats nominate? If Obama has a good year like he did 4 years ago in Harris County, Democrats could elect a DA and win a bunch of judgeships.
It matters if it's a close election. It matters at the margin. I think Harris County is probably in play this fall. Strong Democrats will win. Strong Republicans will win. It's where the majority of the seats will fall is, I think, what's the open question is.
Here's a challenge to Dick Murray and Mr. Jones. I saw the mayor of Houston at a state Democratic convention. I saw her make a presentation. She described us as a Democratic city. She's a Democratic mayor. I challenge you, two guys. What's the for the Democrats running the city of Houston? How would you define a Democratic governance of the city of Houston that voters will latch on to and say, I'm going to be for that?
Well, I don't think you generally see it. Anise Parker and Bill White were Democrats, our two most recent mayors, but they sure didn't make a lot out of it. They got a lot of Republican votes in 2003 when Bill White won, and Anise Parker beat a credible African-American candidate in 2009 in every Republican precinct in the city. So in running for office herself, when she had to achieve the office, Anise Parker sure didn't run as a Democrat. You wouldn't have carried River Oaks and Kingwood and Clear Lake so easily. So some of that is just, I think, where she's at now politically. She's not likely to be eligible to run again for nonpartisan office, and therefore she has to run as a partisan. She can't run as a Republican. So I think she's now grooming her Democratic credentials on the back slope of the mayor's office.
So what would be wrong, Mr. Jones, with the Democrats saying, here's what we mean when we say we're a Democratic city. We're for a livable wage. We're going to help the janitors out. We're going to stop the cops. It's open season on black males. Affirmative action percentages are anemic. We're going to improve those. Is there anything wrong with that message if you want to get a Democratic vote paying attention?
Well, no, there's nothing wrong with it, but
why aren't they doing it?
Because they believe they can win without it. One of the things that we've seen happening, particularly in the African-American Hispanic community, is that Democrats who are running don't necessarily offer the kinds of things that these communities are asking for. The position is that we have to be right of center in order to win. And so that we will simply ask you to support us with a nod and a wink, and that perhaps we'll do something a little bit later on. But many of those basic issues that are important to these communities, the mayor, Bill White, none of these candidates are really dealing with those.
So they're not doing a very good job, is what you're saying. The Democrats are doing a terrible job as far as addressing the needs of their base.
They are making a decision as to what is best for their election. And their position is that if they speak directly to these issues of the base, they're going to lose other votes, and the base is going to support them anyway. And so we see them only marginally raising questions to the base and saying, the other guys are much worse, so you better stick with me.
I believe you nailed the analysis, and I think, by the way, that's one of my viewpoint of the African-American vote, that the African-American vote, when it's in lockstep with one party, whatever party it is, it's taken for granted. And what's happened in city elections is the big minority that's in play is the Republican vote. That's who determines who wins and loses. That's why you have Bill White and Anise Parker trying to burnish their fiscal conservative credentials with Republicans to get elected. I think that being the factor.
But there are a lot of issues in city government that have no relevance to partisan politics at the state or federal level. And the best example was the drainage fee and red light camera, where you saw the mayor strongly in support of both of them, and the African American voted, Democratic vote, strongly opposed to them. I think by margins of 60 to 70%, they voted against red light cameras and the drainage fee, which showed up again when she ran for her second term, and she barely avoided a runoff, but lost heavily in black boxes. So this idea that there are Democratic and Republican issues in cities that play out in national politics, I think is somewhat probably problematic, and I think as Franklin pointed out, there are core constituencies, African Americans, Hispanics, and Anglos, progressive whites, and Republicans, who look at these issues very differently as you move across levels of government. So how well Annise Parker could translate a mayoral office into a statewide or national, a lot depends on what she's perceived at. I think her best bet would be to simply be a competent mayor, one who can sort of, what did she call it, making people eat their peas and carrots, rather than looking at what I call national issues, same-sex marriage or deficit spending or, of course, health care. They don't work out well, I think, and particularly in the South.
Dick and Franklin, Stein missed Gary's point. Gary's point was he, representing conservative interests and conservative voters, is marketing to those voters on behalf of Mayor Parker, whoever, and the whatever message might be applied to attract other voters is they're just accepting. They get seconds. There is no marketing to. In other words, people are afraid to ask for a black vote with a message. They're afraid to, because they're running to get Gary's vote.
Well, I think that's part of. But see, the other part of it is that the conservative vote is not addressing these issues as well, right? And so there's no real reason for the African American vote to join that conservative vote when they see that conservative vote taking issues contrary to what the African American community think is responsible for them. And so what you see happening is being ignored by one, being paid off by the other. And so the question becomes, how do you ideologically get the parties to begin to address issues that you perceive are in your community's best interest?
So you would say there's no organizational body in the African American community that can negotiate and say this is what we want. There's no elected official that does it. There's no organization that does it anymore. All black voters are basically left out of the equation. Is that your position?
No. You have different. The black community is not monolithic, and so you have different groups looking after different interests. I mean, for example, we raised an earlier question about in the district attorney's race, and who is in fact supporting who. Or, for example, we look at the Palmer race and the Harris County Black Democrats and the Black leadership
versus
endorsing
the gay Democrats,
Kirkland, right? And of course, the community went in a different direction, and so that the old practice of being able to identify a set number of black elected officials and leaders, and that they could automatically, along with the ministers, develop the black vote. They're not capable of doing that anymore. We may see some instances where they are important, but no, that we are no longer a monolithic community that can be delivered to anyone.
And there's no democratic message that is trying to attract them.
The Democratic
in fact,
Party
would you
in
say
Texas
would anybody disagree that the columnists in the Houston Chronicle, Ms. Hart is a famous example, are more likely to put out a message that would be a Democratic platform message than is anyone in the Democratic Party.
Okay,
than any institution, and that better than any elected official is doing.
Well,
I think Democrats sitting back and wait for Patricia Hart, to establish their issues.
I mean, there's an assumption that there is a Democratic message, right? That there's a position of the political party that this is what Democrats are all about. But I think that what you see inside the Democratic Party, particularly in Texas, is a multitude of people having different kind of views and attitudes, such that I don't see a single clear message that I can say this is the message of the Democratic Party.
How about this question? When is Texas going to be a competitive two-party state?
I think it might be in 2016 if, say, Hillary Clinton were the Democratic presidential nominee, particularly if Mitt Romney wins the presidency this fall, because it's not a good time to be president generally. Presidents are going to take their hits. Hillary Clinton, when she ran here in 2008, the Democratic primary, did extraordinarily well with white women and Hispanics. Mr. Obama did terrifically well with very well-educated whites, including some white women, and with African Americans. Hillary Clinton could pick up his part of the constituency and take it into a general election, I think, quite effectively. And with the significant growth in the Hispanic vote in the state and moderate growth in the black community, that could make the 2016 presidential race competitive. If it's not Hillary Clinton, under favorable circumstances, we're looking at the 2020s.
Interesting.
On a statewide basis, I think the Republicans will win the 2014 statewide races. 2018 starts becoming a jump ball, and then 2022 is when the Democrats are really in play.
I think the big variable here is if the economy in Texas improves as it looks like it will, Hispanics who come of age will stop being as immobile as they are. When you see the voter registration list and turnout rates, the things that predict Hispanic voting are just the same things that predict any other person's voting. Home ownership, marriage, jobs, children. And as that Hispanic population demographically ages up, particularly the registered voters, here in Harris County, Hispanic surname registered voters are good half a standard deviation younger than any other voter on the ballot. So they tend not to be married or own a home, and they rent. And renters move around, and as renters move around, they lose their registration. I think by 2020, just demographically, it'll stabilize. Economy improves. These are people getting homes in the suburbs. And I think Dick pointed something that's worth mentioning. You're seeing a lot more out-migration of African-American Hispanics into the suburban rings now of Fort Bend, Montgomery. You're seeing more older Anglos moving back into the city from Katy and Cy-Fair. So what you're going to begin to see is, and I think Robert's written this on his blog, there'll be a lot of House seats the Republicans are going to lose simply because they had to pair up a lot this year. But you'll start waking up and seeing Fort Bend County having a large Hispanic population. Doesn't mean the Republicans can't appeal to them, and that's the real challenge. But my guess is that number will still favor the Democrats.
One of the things that most quickly changes a state or community now in our polarized partisan system is if the white population starts declining in absolute numbers. That's one of the things that killed the California Republican Party. You had 2 million Anglos leave the state net, and you had significant growth in the Asian and Hispanic communities that were at the same time becoming more democratic, partly because of Pete Wilson and harsh rhetoric. That's the real risk for the Republican Party locally. In Harris County, for 15 years, we've been losing Anglos. And that's one of the reasons the county will be, I think, quite competitive in 2012, because the electorate's significantly more favorable to Democrats than it was in 2008, because we've got 30,000 fewer Anglos in the county, and they won't vote here. And we've got about 30,000 more blacks and about 100,000 more Hispanics. But it's that 30,000 fewer whites, because those were voters. So in Deer Park, I think we will see fewer voters cast for the Republican presidential candidate in 2012 than in 2008. Not because anybody in Deer Park changed their mind. It's because some of them are dead, and some of them have moved to the Hill Country or some other place, and they're not going to vote in Harris County. No. The Republicans will carry Deer Park massively, but I think with about 90 to 95% of the vote they got in 2008.
Wow.
Let's talk about prejudice. I saw a poll, a Gallup poll, says 18% of Americans will not vote for a Mormon. There was some research the other day from Harvard, where a researcher found that by looking at Google hits that there's surprise, there's still racism in the United States, and Obama actually underperformed in 2008 because of racism. Size that up for us.
Well, I think on the Mormonism issue, you have to look at where those voters are in which states. They may be clustered in states that the Republican nominee is going to carry anyway.
Like Mississippi.
Or Texas.
Yeah.
I read the paper. I was actually at a conference with the guy who gave the paper.
Which, the one I'm talking about?
The Google searches. And I think, first, Robert's been absolutely correct. The racism hasn't disappeared, and it won't. It'll die off. And as Dick pointed out, as older Anglo populations move through, at least those of us who teach at universities will notice that kids coming in are just, have a hard time understanding, what do you mean, the civil rights movement and people killed small children? Or the one that I think is even more astounding is they can't understand why people wouldn't want a gay person to be your mayor or same-sex marriage. Oh. And these are conservatives on economic matters. So, but I think the racism's not going away. And as Dick pointed out, if older white voters are more likely to vote, it has a supernova effect, right? Before they, I should say, expire, their rates of voting are going to be just so much more higher than youngers, but they leave with a big impact. And I think
we got 1 minute left. How about a prediction for the presidency? Who wins Harris County? Who wins the nation? Robert?
I would give Romney a slight edge at this point in time.
In both places?
Yes.
I'd give Romney an advantage in Harris County and Obama the slightest, thanks to Nate Silver's work, a slight advantage in the country, although I don't know why.
Dr. Jones?
I'll do the opposite. I'll pick Obama in Harris County, and I do believe that he probably will eke out a victory.
Dr. Stein?
I'll join with Professor Jones. I think Harris County, although the state of Texas will clearly be a red state, I think Harris County will be a little blue island in the southeast corner, and I'd give a slight advantage nationally.
Okay,
to
David,
President
and I
Obama.
say that Romney narrowly wins Harris County and Romney narrowly wins
And of
the
course,
nation.
no one,
Because the economy's not getting
no
better.
one said anything about how the Germans are going to make it all happen one way or
That'll be
the other.
another show, David.
Thanks for being here, everyone. And we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. So click on the local program bar, Red, White, and Blue, read about our guests, and watch the shows along with our follow-up discussion. And until next time, get informed and get active.